for a rematch. Tonight, you will hear from the two candidates fighting for your vote. Incumbent Senator Chris Murphy.
I grew up in Connecticut. I spent my entire life here.
And businessman Matt Corey.
Connecticut needs somebody that actually represents Connecticut.
Looking to do something no Republican has done in the state of Connecticut in 42 years.
I think the voters are seeing what's happening with their pocketbooks. I think they want to change.
I get to represent Connecticut in the Senate, and I hope that people still see the joy and the enthusiasm that I bring to the job.
A global pandemic, transition of power, record inflation, and 6 years separates the two candidates from the last time they faced off. So what has changed, and where do they stand now on the issues you care most about? Live from your local election headquarters in New Haven, this is the 2024 Connecticut U.S. Senate debate.
Good evening and welcome to the Connecticut U.S. Senate debate. This is the only time these two candidates will face off before the election. I'm Dennis House.
And I'm Catherine Hauser. We are so glad that you're here with us. We have a lot of ground to cover, but first we begin with the debate rules. Mr. Murphy, Mr. Corey, you will each have 90 seconds to answer a question. Each rebuttal will get 45 seconds, and you'll get 15 seconds for a clarification. And both candidates will have 30 seconds for a closing statement. Time will be kept in our control room, and a sign here in the studio will let each candidate know that they have 15 seconds left. And then you'll hear this bell, and that will let you know when your time is up.
And we encourage you who are watching to share your concerns on X. Look for the hashtag CT Senate Debate and use that, where you'll find all of the sources we used to develop our questions tonight. And with that, let's get started. The economy is a major issue for Connecticut residents and the leading issue in our recent Nexstar Media poll. A basket of groceries that cost $100 in 2020 is now almost $126. Mr. Murphy, can you give us one specific thing you would do moving forward to lower costs for Connecticut consumers? You have 90 seconds.
Well, Dennis, Catherine, WTNH, thank you very much for hosting this debate. For those of you who were tuning in to watch Jeopardy, I'm sorry. But I think you're going to see an interesting set of differences between the two candidates and the two parties. Listen, the economy is much better today than it was when Donald Trump left office. Unemployment is low, factory construction is booming, inflation is much lower. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck in this economy today, things are really tough. During my walk across Connecticut this year, I spent some time with an older man named Izzy, and he had worked for one of these big multinational corporations. He had played by the rules his entire life, but they didn't give him a pension. So when he retired, he was left with only Social Security income, and it just didn't pay enough for him to be able to meet his bills. And so we have to be serious about helping people like Izzy. Here's what we need to do to get costs down. One, we need to take on the price gougers. These big corporations are getting away with murder. The cost of a package of chicken has gone up by 30 to 40%, in part because of price collusion. So I continue to support efforts to go after those price gougers. We've got to put money back into the pockets of regular consumers. That means a child tax credit for families that need help. What we don't need is more tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires, as supported by Donald Trump, or a $4,000 tax increase, as he's proposing, due to a set of thoughtless and insane tariffs. So the focus has got to be on people like Izzy.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Corey, same question to you. Give us one specific thing you would do to lower costs for Connecticut consumers. You have 90 seconds.
Well, the senator doesn't want you to believe your lying eyes. We can see how high prices are all around. We can see the job losses. We can see a lot of small businesses closing down. He was proud to vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, which put $7 trillion into this economy that we didn't need. Rose your prices of gas, groceries. I don't have to tell you, you could go to any supermarket, you'll see what the prices cost. If you look all around our state, small businesses are closing down, hospitalities, their businesses are closing down, 2,900 jobs out of Aetna are being lost. What we need to do is we need pro-growth policies. Senator Murphy is proposing in the next administration to add another $5 trillion in tax increases and spending that's out of control. What we need to do is we need to bring corporations back, lowering the corporate tax rate, lowering the small business tax rate, lowering the income tax rate. We need pro-growth policies to bring back to Connecticut. We used to be on a global market here. We used to be the gateway to New England. We need to bring jobs back to this state, and with tax and spend policies coming out of Washington, that means they're completely out of touch. And this isn't taxes for millionaires and billionaires. It was proven there was more money going into the government coffers. It's the spending that needs to be cut and the wasteful spending. There was over $1 trillion in wasteful spending in that package that they put forth. We need somebody down in Washington that understands business, understands the effect of policies that they bring home and how it affects individuals and businesses every single day. And I'm that guy to do that.
Mr. Corey, thank you. Catherine.
Turning now to the cost of housing. Housing affordability is another important issue for Connecticut voters. The Connecticut Housing Finance Authority says there is a shortage of 92,000 affordable housing units here in our state. Mr. Corey, I begin with you. What specific policies are you supporting to increase the availability of affordable housing in Connecticut? You have 90 seconds.
Once again, that is lowering the cost of doing business, lowering the inflation costs. We have young kids that are trying to buy houses between 27 and 28. It's out of their reach and out of their touch because of the inflation that this administration has caused. And just let's just get this straight. He embraces every policy that the vice president said she wouldn't change anything that happened in the last 3.5 years. We can't afford another 4 years of tax increases. We need to lower this economy. Affordable housing, just think about that word, what you're talking about, affordable. Things are out of reach. I have young kids trying to buy a house. It's $20,000, $30,000 above asking cost all the time. We need to bring jobs back here. What is happening is zoning's got to take control of that. We need more multifamily units. It didn't help that we had over 11 billion people come into this country illegally who took up a lot of the housing. We had a lot of young kids who are moving out of state. We need to create more housing and more housing opportunities. But affordable, that's a zoning issue. We hope that the towns and the states can work together to make sure they have the right housing for the right people in some of those areas that people can't afford, and we need to lower those prices. But the main thing is making it affordable. And how do you do that? Is lowering the cost of doing business and lowering the cost of taxes. And this administration hasn't done that.
Mr. Murphy, Vice President Kamala Harris has proposed giving first-time homebuyers a $25,000 down payment. Would you support that proposal? And how do you think that would impact demand and housing costs? You have 90 seconds.
I do support that proposal, and that's a really important proposal for Connecticut. We want our young people in Connecticut to be able to stay here, but many of them leave because it is very difficult for those young families to be able to afford that initial down payment. But I frankly agree with Mr. Corey that one of the biggest problems here is that it is far too costly to build housing in this state and in this country. So I do think it's important to be able to bring down the overall cost, the regulatory burden of building new houses. The tax cut that Donald Trump is talking about is 80% geared towards people who are making $1 million or more. Kamala Harris is talking about tax cuts that are going to be invested in middle-class families, in young families, those families that are struggling with housing costs today. Donald Trump also suggests that the way to solve the housing crisis is to build more housing on public lands. Well, we don't really have federal lands in Connecticut, so that's a proposal that might help other parts of the country, but not here in Connecticut. So let's bring down the cost of housing. Let's cut the regulatory burdens that many developers face. And yes, let's give tax breaks and tax cuts not to millionaires and billionaires and corporations. Let's give them to first-time home buyers. That would be a big help to a lot of families here in Connecticut.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Dennis.
Let's turn now to the issue of immigration. Mr. Murphy, 2 people are under arrest in connection with a homicide in Stamford. Police say both were linked to Venezuelan gangs and were in this country illegally. Do you believe the Biden-Harris administration has been aggressive enough to keep people like this out of Connecticut? You have 90 seconds.
Well, let me say this first. I believe that Connecticut is stronger because of our immigrant communities. I live in the south end of Hartford, and my neighborhood is better off because we have people from all over the world, from Central America, South America, the Pacific, coming to live in Connecticut, often fleeing terror and torture and economic desperation. I don't believe this rhetoric from the right that we should fear our neighbors or that we should fear immigrants that are coming for a better life into this country. But I do believe in border security, so much so that I was the lead Democrat negotiating the toughest bipartisan border security bill in a generation, a bill that would have allowed the president to shut down the border when crossings were too high. It would have invested billions of new dollars in personnel and infrastructure at the border so we can make sure that we apprehend anybody that is coming to this country to commit crimes. That bill would have passed if not for Donald Trump. Donald Trump told his supporters in the United States Senate to kill that bill because it would have been good politically for Democrats. Donald Trump knew that that bill would have helped to secure the border, and so he told his supporters, kill it because we want chaos at the border. Chaos at the border helps Republicans and hurts Democrats, so let's kill this good bipartisan border bill. I think we can celebrate this nation's history of immigration. We can celebrate immigrant communities while getting the border under control. And I'm sorry we lost that opportunity earlier this year.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Mr. Corey, there are several sanctuary cities throughout Connecticut, including New Haven, Hartford, and Middletown. One estimate places the number of undocumented immigrants in Connecticut at over 100,000. You have called for ending sanctuary cities, essentially revoking federal funds from those cities. Would you take it a step further and support large-scale deportations? You have 90 seconds.
Well, look, I want to get back to what Senator Murphy said. Look, we want a diverse community. I live in a diverse community. I've been in the city of Hartford for over 32 years with my businesses. We're not talking about legal immigration. We're talking about illegal immigration. Senator Murphy wants to twist those words. That border bill was not a great bipartisan border bill. It would have allowed over 5,000 people coming into this country illegally. What else would it allow? Fentanyl to pour across our border, unaccompanied minors to pour across our border. Senator Murphy wants to tell you that President Trump killed that bill. There was 6 Democratic senators that voted against that. I'm pretty sure President Trump doesn't have much sway over Senator Cory Booker or even Senator Bernie Sanders. So this bill was a failure. It's still catch and release is what is wrong in this country. And I'm not talking about a mass deportation, but the people that need to be eliminated from this country are the people that are committing the most heinous crimes. And because of sanctuary city status, the local police, state police can't work with ICE. Now, I know Senator Murphy walked across the state and he stopped in Norwich, stopped at the library. I'm sure they have a wonderful library, but where he should have stopped was at the police station and fire station to say, how much more Narcan do you guys need because of all the fentanyl that's pouring across our border? But where he really should have stopped was at Casey Chadwick's mother's house, because Casey Chadwick was killed by an illegal alien that was here that had an ICE detainer on him and should have been deported. But because of sanctuary city status, he wasn't.
Mr. Corey, just to clarify, I'll give you 15 seconds. Do you support mass deportations?
I would start with the people that are committing the most heinous crimes. And then we would look at how people got here, not people that got here on no fault of their own, but the people that committed the most heinous crimes.
And Mr. Murphy, I'll give you 45 seconds to respond.
Well, listen, I just don't understand why we didn't take the chance to invest the $40 billion in the bipartisan bill in border security. I think Republicans like to complain about the border, but don't end up ever actually proposing solutions. We had a chance to strengthen the border, but Republicans threw away that chance because they didn't want to give up their talking point. They didn't want to be able to, they didn't want to be in a position where they could stop complaining about the border and have us come together and do something about it together.
So there was an H.R. 2 bill that was sitting on Senator Chuck Schumer's desk that he didn't even have to waste the months of doing a bipartisan bill. And that H.R. 2 bill
we're going to get to
remain in Mexico,
Mr. Corey,
build the border wall,
move on to our next
and
question.
catch and release.
Let's turn now to the Middle East, where fighting has escalated in the region. The U.S. recently deployed approximately 100 more troops to Israel. Mr. Corey, we'll begin with you here. Should the U.S. deploy more forces to the region? And is there anything Israel could do that you would not support? You have 90 seconds.
Look, I served over in the Middle East, unfortunately, in 1983 when they blew up the Marine barracks. Senator Murphy's policies were appeasement. He went against the entire Trump administration, the previous administration, went against Secretary Pompeo, went against the maximum pressure policies on Iran. Senator Murphy was all for taking the Houthis off the terrorist organization watch list. Right now, today, we have the largest naval engagement we've had since World War II. This stuff wouldn't have happened. Iran was on its knees. What happened? They were sitting on over $200 or $300 billion because of oil sales. The Houthi rebels, Hezbollah, and Hamas are attacking Israel on all fronts. I unequivocally support Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu because he is the only person today, is the leader of the free world, the face of the free world, and we are withholding information. And what Senator Murphy wanted to do was pull military assets out of there. That is a wrong move. I support Prime Minister, and I hope he can eradicate people from Lebanon that are Hezbollah and Hamas, so those people can live in peace.
Mr. Corey, thank you. Mr. Murphy, you chair a key Senate subcommittee focused on the Middle East, and you've been critical of Israel's actions in Gaza. Should the U.S. send more troops and weapons to the region? You have 90 seconds.
So what happened on October 7th of last year is unconscionable. It's horrific. And Israel has the right, the obligation to defend itself. And I support their efforts to make sure that Hamas can never, ever again launch the attacks that we saw on that day. I think you can believe that, but also believe that far too many civilians have lost their life in Gaza. I frankly think that's what most people here in Connecticut believe, that Israel should defend itself, but that the carnage inside Gaza has been too significant. What I want is a ceasefire. I want a ceasefire that brings those hostages home, that ends the hostilities and gets us back on a path so that the Palestinians can have their own state side by side with a safe Israel. I don't think the United States should be directly involved in this conflict. We obviously have to protect our forces in the region, but ultimately we need to work towards de-escalation so that we can stop the fighting, we can begin the process of rebuilding Gaza and Lebanon, and we can find the Palestinians a home, which is the only way to bring long-term peace to the region.
Gentlemen, thank you. Catherine.
Now to the topic of abortion. Mr. Murphy, we begin with you. Vice President Kamala Harris recently said that she would support ending the filibuster to bring back Roe v. Wade. You have said that you believe the filibuster is anti-democratic. You've also used it to advance gun control measures. Do you think the filibuster should be eliminated for Roe v. Wade or other legislation? You have 90 seconds.
Well, let's be clear. A woman's right to decide what she does with her own body here in Connecticut is on the ballot this election. I wish that weren't true, but it is. The Republican Party platform calls for a national abortion ban. Let's be honest about what that means. That means here in Connecticut, a young woman could be raped by her family member and be forced to bear that child. I know that doesn't seem possible in Connecticut, but if the Republican Party platform was put into law, then no one in Connecticut is safe. What I support is the restoration of Roe versus Wade, right? The ability of a woman and her doctor to make healthcare decisions, not a politician in Washington. And yes, I would support changing the filibuster so that we can pass that very popular measure with 50 votes. But this election, frankly, is going to decide, likely, whether women in this country and possibly whether women in Connecticut have the right to be able to make their own decisions about their healthcare future. This is a big decision that the people of Connecticut and the people of this country are making.
Mr. Corey, you have said that you would not support a national abortion ban, but do you believe there are instances such as rape, incest, or the health of the mother where the federal government should step in to protect abortion access in states without those exceptions? You have 90 seconds.
Look, I stand with the people of the state of Connecticut. Senator Murphy wants to use this as a fear tactic. It's unconstitutional. It was brought back to the states. The states need to decide. They've been decided for years. But he says he's so pro-women. When Senator Marsha Blackburn was trying to protect women in sports, he called her a little person. She wanted to protect women in sports because they wanted to recognize women on October 10th, National Women's Day, for their achievements that they made. When Senator Murphy says, I support that, he supports women, that is not true. When the young girls were complaining about men in their bathrooms, in their showers and locker rooms, he shamed them. And so when we asked Senator Murphy back in 2018 about members of Congress during the Me Too movement, of what happened down there in Washington and the names to be released, we have heard silence, and silence is complicity. So you can't say you're pro-women and you want to protect women's rights. So I was just wanting to know why Senator Murphy hasn't been more active on releasing the names of people that are hiding behind a $20 million hush fund in Washington, D.C., and hiding and silencing victims in Washington, D.C. Senator Murphy needs to answer for that. I'm just wondering, Senator Murphy, is anybody in your campaign or yourself ever been accused since you've been an elected official? I mean, if you want to protect women, then be forthright and protect women. But my stance on that is the states, it's due to the states took control of that. He just wants to fearmonger.
Mr. Murphy, you have 45 seconds to respond to that.
Well, listen, it is just true that in the Republican Party platform is a call for the law to be changed, for a fetus to be treated as a person. And if that is indeed the law, that means that every abortion in this country would be illegal, regardless of whether you live in Connecticut, a blue state, or you live in Texas, a red state. So it is just absolutely true that this is a question in front of the American voters this year. So I don't think I'm fear-mongering on this topic. I just think I'm reflecting what the actual Republican Party platform is. I want to make sure that Connecticut families and Connecticut women get to make their own health care decisions, and that's what I'm going to fight for if I'm reelected to the Senate.
Mr. Corey, 45 seconds to respond.
And they do. The state of Connecticut's law is what it is, and they do. So Senator Murphy wants to fearmonger in this election because that's what they do in Washington. They send fear through you. People are going to be dictators. It's just, this is what, when you're down in Washington that long, that's what you do. You bring that home and you scare your constituents. The law is settled in the state of Connecticut. I stand by the law in the state of Connecticut. The Republican Party's platform, it's already said they will veto any national abortion ban. That is the truth.
All right, we're going to move on to our next topic. Thank you, gentlemen. Dennis?
Catherine, turning to transgender rights, Connecticut has been in the national spotlight regarding the rights of transgender students to compete in sports. Mr. Corey, you have said, if elected, you would be a senator similar to Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, who introduced a bill which would, quote, ban federal funding for schools that permit a male to participate in a women's sports event. Would you support that legislation? You have 90 seconds.
I absolutely would support that. When are men in this country going to start standing up for women's rights? Why should women suffer? Now, Senator Murphy wants to call us little people and bullies. This is just the wrong rhetoric. Nobody wants, and you see around the country, women are trying to stand up for what they believe in. Why should we wipe out the achievements, the scholarships, records? Right here in Connecticut, how many records were wiped out? How many scholarships were broken? We have women that don't even want to compete in sports because they have to compete against a male. They don't want to get hurt. They don't want to get injured. Yes, I would stand by that bill. But once again, when are men in this country going to start standing up for women?
Mr. Murphy, you recently championed the rights of transgender athletes on the Senate floor. What do you say to voters who think those athletes have an unfair advantage? You have 90 seconds.
Well, what I said in that speech is that it should be up to every individual community, every individual board of education to make that decision. I don't think the federal government should be setting the policy for women's, men's, boys, girls sports here in Connecticut. But listen, I do have a problem with Republican politicians who spend an outsized amount of time focused on an issue that matters to very few voters compared to the importance of issues like the economy, like choice, like the cost of healthcare. I do think that there is a campaign of fear underway in this country, led by people like Ron DeSantis, to try to bully and marginalize gay and transgender children, to make us all believe that we have something to fear from people or children whose sexual orientation is different from us. There's an epidemic of suicide and self-harm in this country amongst our gay students and transgender students. And it often happens because they are made to feel ostracized by the communities in which they live, because there are federal politicians going around pretending like the biggest problem facing this country is whether or not transgender girls get to participate in sports or not. I'm not saying that that isn't a legitimate issue for some communities, but they should be able to decide that for themselves instead of having the policy be set at a federal level. I really do worry about the health of our gay children, our transgender children. I do think the impact of this rhetoric is serious on them.
Thank you.
And I want us to focus on problems that really matter to everybody in this country.
Thank you, gentlemen. Catherine?
Now to the future of Connecticut, our next topic. In a recent Next Star poll of 5th District voters, 53% think Connecticut is moving in the wrong direction. Mr. Murphy, you served the 5th District for 6 years. You've been in the Senate for the last 12. For voters looking for a change, would you do anything different this time around if reelected? You have 90 seconds.
So listen, I think people are hurting in this country. And the economy is much better. If you want a job, you can get it. Factory construction is up. Crime is going down. But people feel powerless in this country, even people that are working. And that's because the structure of this economy is broken. These corporations, these billionaires, they have far too much power, and people have less than ever before. So what I think we need to do as a country is to take on corporate and consolidated power, to break up some of these quasi-monopolies, to go after the technology companies that are harming our kids on a daily basis, getting them addicted to these screens. So yes, I think the economy is improving here in Connecticut. We've won back all of the jobs and created more since the pandemic. But I do think that there's a real mismatch between the amount of power that economic elites have in this country and the amount of power that regular people have in this country. That's why I've supported President Biden's efforts to take on the big corporations, to support labor unions, to give tax cuts to people who really need them. And it's why I'm so upset about his policies, which seem to be, just reinforcing the power that these big companies have. He said to the oil companies, if you give my campaign $1 billion, I'll give you whatever you want in my administration. That means more power for the oil industry, higher prices for consumers. That's certainly not what we need in Connecticut.
Mr. Corey, Connecticut has not elected a Republican to the Senate in 42 years. This is also a state former President Trump lost by 20 points in 2020. For voters who want something different but do not support the former president, name specific ways you differ from him. You have 90 seconds.
Look, there's not many ways. I mean, I have a better personality than he has, but look, these tax cuts that Senator Murphy, because he's never owned a business, never worked in the private sector, doesn't understand how the economy works. What he's telling the voters of Connecticut, don't believe your lying eyes. Don't believe that Aetna's shutting down 2,900 jobs around the country. Don't believe the bankruptcies and all these hospitality businesses. Don't believe the small restaurants that are closing down. Those Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, what Senator Murphy wants to get rid of, will increase your income tax, will increase small business tax, will increase your capital gains tax, will increase your estimated gains tax. This is the tax policies just do not create jobs. We need to lower the tax structure. We need to make sure that people have work. Trillions and trillions of dollars were repatriated back under the past administration. The jobs that Senator Murphy talks about are the jobs that were created after COVID, that were lost. And a lot of these small businesses never opened up because of the massive shutdowns. I'm in the hospitality business. There's people around Connecticut could tell you a mom and a pop business in their neighborhood that's closed down after 25, 30 years with all the mandates and regulations. Senator Murphy doesn't understand any of that. You go through the city of Hartford, 3/4 of the buildings are in foreclosure. Jobs are being lost every single day in the state of Connecticut. We used to be, once again, the beacon light of New England. Senator Murphy doesn't understand that because he's never worked in the private sector. He wants to blame large corporations. It's not the fact.
Mr. Murphy, I'm going to give you 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah, listen, I understand Mr. Corey's enthusiasm for Donald Trump's tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires and corporations. It's because he believes what most Republicans believe, that that money will eventually trickle down to everybody else. But that's never, ever how it's worked. And, the good news is that we have evidence to compare the economy under Donald Trump to the economy under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We lost jobs over the 4 years that Donald Trump was president. We've never created more jobs than we've created in the 4-year period of time that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been in charge. We lost 170,000 manufacturing jobs when Donald Trump was president. We've created over 700,000 manufacturing jobs just in the last 3.5 years. And so I get it that there's a group of people that think if you give tax cuts to the wealthy, it'll get down to the poor. It just has never worked that way.
Mr. Corey, I want to give you 45 seconds.
Look, he can project whatever he wants. We lost 150,000 manufacturing jobs this year alone. All you have to do is ask yourself, and this will be a short 45 seconds, are you better off today than you were or in case of Senator Murphy, 6 years ago? What he's trying to tell you is don't believe the job losses. Don't believe the companies that are closing down. And these are under the tax policies that he embraces. And you're going to get another 4 years of that. The same thing, more taxes, more spending. At $35 trillion in debt, we spent over $1 trillion in interest rates alone. Just think about that. Just think about that $1 trillion that could have went to all these construction jobs here in Connecticut, good union jobs that could have built our roads, our bridges, our highways. He's not talking about that because he doesn't understand the private sector.
We're going to move on to our next topic. Thank you, gentlemen. Dennis.
Catherine, there has been a lot of response to comments made at a Trump rally in New York on Sunday. Mr. Corey, you were at that rally when a comedian called Puerto Rico, quote, a floating island of garbage. Puerto Ricans make up the largest portion of the Hispanic population in our state. The Trump campaign has said that comment does not reflect the views of the former president. What is your response to the hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans in Connecticut?
Look, I agree with the former president. It doesn't reflect us. I wasn't in the rally when that happened. I was standing in line. I didn't have the privilege to be in there. But what is really at stake here is jobs and opportunity. This is what sometimes the media does and sometimes the senator does. It's diffusing from failed policies. Let's look at Puerto Rico in itself. During the 1990s, when President Bill Clinton was in power, they got rid of the corporate tax cuts that they had down there. Now they made the corporate tax rates as just as competitive, I mean, not just the same as here in the United States. And what happened to Puerto Rico in the 90s? Well, Senator Murphy was going through growing pains. I visited San Juan coming back from the Middle East. That was a booming place. Everybody was working. Because they went back and didn't keep those corporate tax rates cut, all those manufacturing jobs have left Puerto Rico. All the youth have fled Puerto Rico and came to states like Connecticut. And what was left? Some corruption in the government, and you had left the elderly people behind. There's no job opportunities, or not as much as there were in the 1980s when I was there. So we are talking about jobs. If you want to talk about distractions, yes, we love our Puerto Rican community. I was a minority in my own company for 32 years. Wonderful people, hardworking people. Those statements from that comedian does not represent all the Republicans that want to fight for jobs for not only just Puerto Ricans, but for everybody in the state of Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. And Mr. Murphy, in response to those comments on Sunday, President Biden said, quote, the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. Late today, Vice President Harris said she strongly disagrees with any criticism of people based on who they vote for. More than 700,000 Connecticut residents supported President Trump in 2020. What do you say to them?
Well, let's just be clear. The media isn't overhyping what Republicans are saying right now, right? In that rally, one of Trump's supporters called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. President Trump hasn't distanced himself from that comment. He hasn't criticized that comment. Why? Because he himself has ran a campaign trying to make us deathly afraid of people who are coming to this country to seek a better life. This narrative that Haitian immigrants are eating pets, his rhetoric that immigrants to this country are vermin, and this is really disgusting. It is hateful. It's not the America that I recognize. What I think of America is a country that is made stronger by our immigrant communities. And I just, really worry that President Trump himself has refused to distance himself from these comments. What I, heard President Biden say was in reference to the rhetoric, not to the individuals. And listen, I'll just be clear. I represent everybody in this state. You're right. There are a lot of people in Connecticut who support Donald Trump and who are going to support Donald Trump. And I'm going to listen to them and care about them and fight for them just as hard as I'm going to listen to and fight for people who supported Kamala Harris. That's my job as United States Senator, and I think I've lived that ethic. I've reached out across the aisle and been able to build bipartisan support for immigration reform, for gun violence reform. I'll continue to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Corey, I'll give you 45 seconds to respond.
Look, what he says is not true. Just coming from the Democratic Party itself, looking at Trump supporters, looking at the president, calling him a dictator, comparing that rally to a Nazi rally in 1939, the same television station that Senator Murphy's on 24/7 in Washington, D.C. He hasn't condemned MSNBC for that. He hasn't. So I don't know what rhetoric he's talking about, but the rhetoric coming from the Democratic Party is just as bad, if not worse. Look, we're looking for somebody that wants to go to Washington, not use it as their personal playground to be vindictive. You need a senator down in Washington that wants to work for the people, work on issues that are facing everybody every day, which is affordability, better health care, going to the grocery store, you're not choosing between heat and prescription drugs.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I'll give you 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah, this isn't my words. This is President Trump's words. President Trump has actually said that he'll be a dictator on the day that he is sworn in. He has said repeatedly that he believes that there is an enemy within America that is more dangerous than external enemies. And when asked who that enemy within is, he says Democrats. He named some of my future colleagues in the United States Senate. That does seem really dangerous to me when Donald Trump is saying that he would use the army to try to deal with the enemy from within, and he says the enemy from within are Democrats. That doesn't sound like democracy to me. So I don't think that we're engaging in hyperbole when we suggest that President Trump is talking about some real dangerous threats to democracy if he's elected.
Thank you, gentlemen. Catherine.
We are turning now to safety in schools, where school shootings continue to make headlines. Mr. Murphy, you have introduced legislation to remove school resource officers from schools. There are examples of these officers saving lives, and most recently in Appalachia, Georgia. Does removing a trained armed officer make schools safer? You have 90 seconds.
Well, I actually haven't introduced legislation to remove school resource officers. I've introduced legislation to direct federal funding towards social workers and psychologists that I think are very badly needed. I actually think it should be up to every individual school district as to whether they have armed officers, and I support their decisions when they choose to bring those security personnel into the schools. What I'm proud of is the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. For 30 years, we had no action in Washington protecting our kids. And 2 years ago, I brought together Republicans and Democrats to pass the first significant anti-gun violence bill in 3 decades. That bill included some significant and important changes to gun laws, but it also involved security funds for our schools to help schools make investment in hardening their infrastructure. It included money for anti-violence initiatives in our cities to try to interrupt the cycle of violence. And you know what's happened since we passed that bill, a bill that was opposed by Donald Trump and most Republicans, thankfully supported by enough Republicans to get it passed? We've seen urban gun violence in this country drop by 20%. And this year, we have had 25% fewer mass shootings. Now, I'm not going to rest until every single kid in this country is safe, until we have no threats to our children when they walk into schools. But I'm deeply proud of the progress that we have made, the way I've been able to bring Republicans and Democrats together around these common sense gun safety initiatives.
Mr. Corey, you have called for more school resource officers as a solution to the problem. Do you support going as far as arming teachers? You have 90 seconds.
Look, it depends on what district you live in around the country. Look, if there's trained military people, if they're former police officers, I don't have a problem with that. Look, that's up to the communities itself. Whatever school districts want to make up that mind. But let's make no mistake. Senator Murphy has said publicly he wants to remove school resource officers, despite what he says. Because in the last debate we had in 2018, he said, "I'll leave it up to the districts." Once again, he goes back to Washington. He wants to remove them for whatever reason. I don't know. But this is what happens when you defund the police. You have the top of the ticket who wants to defund ICE. We need to support our law enforcement. And despite what Senator Murphy says, there's gun crime all over the cities. Because of why? There's no opportunities. East Haven police officers were getting shot at. Woodbury police officer got stabbed in the neck. There was just a shooting at a Bridgeport school. Our police officers are being attacked every day because the policies that are coming out of this administration, and Senator Murphy, who embraces this administration, is soft on crime. Catch and release doesn't work. People are walking back in the streets, and our police are handcuffed. All you have to do is look in New York City. 75% of the arrests are from illegal immigrants. Senator Murphy's going to tell you one thing, but once again, he says, don't believe what you're seeing in the streets. Don't believe what the news is telling you. Let's believe the FBI statistics that are telling me a different story in Washington.
Mr. Murphy, I'm going to give you 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah, listen, I'm not saying that there aren't still heinous crimes being committed, but it is true that crime is coming down in this country. It is true that there is significantly less urban gun crime. In Hartford this year, we're on pace to have a 50% reduction in gun crime. So I don't know why we'd want to go back Donald Trump says that he wants to eliminate all the progress we've made on tightening our gun laws on the first day that he's in office. That would be a disaster for us. And I would just encourage Mr. Corey to go talk to teachers in Connecticut, to go talk to students. Ask them if they want guns in our schools, in teachers' desks, on teachers' waistbands. Kids and teachers in this state do not want our teachers armed. Let me be clear about that.
Mr. Corey,
I never said that. Once again, he's misconstruing what I said. I said certain parts of the country may allow that. This is up to the school districts here in Connecticut. As a matter of fact, I was in a school system just the other day, Senator, and they were very happy the school resource officers are in there. They're very important in our school systems. They prevent child predators on the internet. They keep kids off drugs. And it's a place for kids to go to when they can't go to a teacher or a parent. We need to support our law enforcement in this state and around the country. And we don't see that coming from this administration when they say they want to defund police. As a matter of fact, Senator Murphy's endorsed by the Working Families Party, who wants to defund the police. If he wasn't so, if he said he didn't want to defund the police, why did he accept that endorsement from the Working Families Party?
Thank you both. We're going to move on to our next topic. Dennis.
Catherine, our next subject, social media. The U.S. Surgeon General blames social media as an important contributor in the mental health crisis among young people. Mr. Corey, would you support age restrictions on children using social media? You have 90 seconds.
Look, this is a parent's decision. We want to make sure kids don't go on certain internet sites. That's a family issue. I don't think there needs to be federal law to restrict people from seeing that type of internet restriction, but that would be a family decision. I wouldn't want people, young kids, having access to anything that's harmful to them. I'm not talking about any time constraints on any kids, but look, that's a parent's decision.
Mr. Murphy, would you consider age restrictions for social media accounts? 90 seconds, please.
Yeah, I'm a parent of a teenager and a preteen. The parents I talk to in Connecticut want help. I think this algorithm that perfects content for kids, that ropes them into addiction, I really think it's a poison. I do. And I think it should be turned off for kids under 18. I don't think we should allow kids under 13 onto social media. And I actually think that parents should be allowed to consent before their children join these social media sites. I think what's happening in this country is really, really dangerous. If you look at the amount of time kids spend with friends, it's half as much today as it was 20 years ago. And so it's not a coincidence that our kids are in increasing mental health crisis today, that suicide rates amongst teenagers are increasing. So yes, I think we should step in and we should keep these kids off of social media until they are 13. And I think we should give parents the right, the ability to consent. I think parents are crying out for those tools. And I don't think it's right for the government just to step back and give parents nothing in the way of help. I think they desperately want that help right now.
Thank you, gentlemen.
We are now, we have just a few short minutes left, so we want to get to a lightning round of questions. Please keep your answers brief. Mr. Corey, we begin with you. Do you own a gun, and what type?
I do. I own a few guns. There's sporting rifles, and I also own hunting rifles. I enjoy that.
Mr. Murphy, do you own a gun, and if so, what type?
I don't, but I support every law-abiding citizen's right to own a gun, and I'll continue to do that.
Mr. Murphy, do you tip on a takeout order?
I do. I do tip on most takeout orders.
Mr. Corey.
I'm in the hospitality business. Of course I do.
Mr. Corey, have you used cannabis since it's become legal in Connecticut?
Not a big fan, no.
Okay. Mr. Murphy, same question. Have you used cannabis since it's become legal?
Similar, not a big fan.
Mr. Murphy, name a senator from the opposite party you respect.
Todd Young of Indiana, John Cornyn of Texas, James Lankford of Oklahoma. Those are the senators that I've worked with to pass bipartisan gun reform, bipartisan immigration reform. I'm lucky that I have a lot of friends on the Republican side that are willing to work on bipartisan legislation. I'm certainly going to continue that in my second term.
Mr. Corey, name a senator from the opposite party you respect.
Look, unfortunately, he passed away. He was one of the most bipartisan senators, Senator Joseph Lieberman.
Thank you, gentlemen. We want to get to your closing statements now. You each have 30 seconds. Mr. Corey, we begin with you.
Look, change begins with a vote. We see the economy, we see an open border, and we see wars around the world. As a United States Navy veteran, I want to make sure our military men and women don't have to serve in dangerous areas because we want to bring peace. If you want change in Washington, it starts with your vote, and you can't have change if you send the same people back to Washington. I'm here, I'm a small business owner, I care about the people that work for me, I care about the community. That's who I want to represent in Washington, D.C., making sure your life is a better place to live.
Mr. Corey, thank you. Mr. Murphy, you have 30 seconds.
Well, enjoyed this debate. I think most people know that I spend a week every year walking across the state, and I do that because I want to better understand what I need to be fighting for on their behalf. But I also do it because I love this job, I do, and I want to show people that I don't take it for granted, that I'm willing to do exceptional things to show gratitude to the people of this state who have given me this chance. And so I really have enjoyed this opportunity to talk to the voters of the state, and I ask for their support when they go to the polls this week or on Tuesday of next week.
Mr. Murphy, Mr. Corey, we thank you so much for being with us here tonight. That concludes the Connecticut U.S. Senate debate.
And we're going to take a quick break, and Tom Dutchick and the Capitol Report crew will have analysis for you. Stay with us.
Hey, welcome back, guys, alongside the Capitol Report panel here in shirt sleeves in the newsroom. The great John McKinney and the great George Simmons. All of us have been in debates in one part, part of our life. What are your general opinions of the debate tonight? I thought it was wide-ranging, a lot of issues, didn't get into Yankees, Dodgers, but other than that, hit everything.
Yeah, I think first, credit to Dennis and Catherine, the moderators. Yeah. They did an excellent job. They kept the candidates on time and on topic, and that's oftentimes hard to do.
Impossible.
Impossible. Overall thoughts, one, I think both candidates did very well, which at the end of the day is not good news for Matt Corey. Matt Corey is the underdog in this race. The reason why incumbents avoid debates is because you don't want to make a big mistake. Nobody made a big mistake. Nobody got a big shot in there. Thought they both did a good job. Last sort of overall thought, a lot of talk about Donald Trump. Not so much about Chris Murphy and Matt Corey.
Well, and I think Matt Corey at some level owns that. You look at his lawn signs, it's him and Donald Trump. He talks about his affiliation, so he's going to hear it. I think Chris did a great job, and Matt did a good job also. But Chris really set the stage that he's the bipartisan guy down in the Senate. We all complain that, why don't we see Washington doing more? Chris has done it on major issues that were stalled forever, and I think he was, at some level, saying, look, I'm here for the people of Connecticut, and I want the trains to run on time, and that's what I do down in
they got
DC.
into an interesting discussion on transgender rights. Let's just take a look at that back and forth.
Why should we wipe out the achievements, the scholarships, records? Right here in Connecticut, how many records were wiped out? How many scholarships were broken? We have women that don't even want to compete in sports because they have to compete against a male. They don't want to get hurt. They don't want to get injured. Yes, I would stand by that bill. But once again, when are men in this country going to start standing up for women?
I'm not saying that that isn't a legitimate issue for some communities, but they should be able to decide that for themselves instead of having the policy be set at a federal level. I really do worry about the health of our gay children, our transgender children. I do think the impact of this rhetoric is serious on them.
Thank you.
And I want us to focus on problems that really matter to everybody in this country.
So, John McKinney, we were watching this. You had an interesting comment during that segment.
Well, I think, it's obviously a very difficult issue, and I think a lot of Republicans are trying to make this an issue at the end of the campaign because most polls show people are uncomfortable with trans women playing in women's sports. But the issue I thought that Matt Corey could have hit a little bit harder is Senator Murphy wants abortion rights for women to be done at a federal level, but he doesn't want transgender rights to be litigated and legislated at the federal level. There's an inconsistency there. I think Matt Corey tried to point it out, but he could have
done
Joe,
better. Quickly, the only coach at the table,
the only coach.
You very well.
Yeah, I do, and the CIC is dealing with it. They're still in court. They're still going through the process. It is a very difficult argument. You talk to the athletes that are affected, and your heart goes out to them. But then you look at the other young kids or young adults, and they are who they are. And why are we taking away opportunities? I think what Chris said very clearly is each Board of Ed the state, whether it's the CIC, they should be deciding. This is just too fluid of an issue, and people are becoming more and more comfortable with it. And I think it's going to change. You think years back, it was a Catholic couldn't marry a Protestant, a black individual couldn't marry a white. Like, we've changed, we've evolved, and we're evolving on this issue. If you pass a heavy-handed federal law, we stop growing. It is the law of the land.
All right, guys, more to come with News 8's coverage of the Murphy-Corey debate. When we get back, don't go away. We're back with News 8's coverage of the 2024 Senate debate alongside Joris and Mitch. Johnny McKinney. Johnny, immigration stood out as an issue that I thought got a lot of traction between both these guys.
It did. I thought Matt Corey had a very good moment when he made sure he talked about the difference between people coming here legally versus illegally. And he reminded Senator Murphy that you should have paid attention to a family in Connecticut who had someone killed by someone who was here illegally. And that's the type of people we're trying to stop. I thought that was one of his better moments.
Yeah, and I think Chris Murphy talking about his experience of really getting that bill to the forefront and working with the Republicans over months and months. I've talked to him throughout the time. He was spending a lot of time there doing it and getting it so close only to have a candidate pull it off the table. And yes, there was Democrats that voted no. You know, Matt kind of twisted it a little bit. They were never going to vote for something as restrictive as that bill because it was bipartisan. So that's why Bernie Sanders and others voted against it. It wasn't the bill necessarily. Donald Trump pulled that trigger and said, no, I want it as a campaign issue, and Republicans fell in line.
You guys, the other hot button issue was abortion. We talked about it briefly here. Watch this clip quickly.
I don't think I'm fear-mongering on this topic. I just think I'm reflecting what the actual Republican Party platform is. I want to make sure that Connecticut families and Connecticut women get to make their own health care decisions, and that's what I'm going to fight for if I'm reelected to the Senate.
Mr. Corey, 45 seconds to respond.
And they do. The state of Connecticut's law is what it is, and they do. So Senator Murphy wants to fear-monger in this election because that's what they do in Washington. They send fear through you. People are going to be dictators. It's just, this is what, when you're down in Washington that long, that's what you do. You bring that home and you scare your constituents. The law is settled in the state of Connecticut. I stand by the law in the state of Connecticut. The Republican Party's platform, it's already said they will veto any national abortion ban. That is the truth.
Joe, a very disciplined Corey with those GOP talking points didn't veer too far from it.
He didn't, but you know, the reality is, yes, Connecticut is safe currently, and our Connecticut laws are the laws of the land. But if there was a national ban on abortions, it would affect Connecticut. It would supersede our law because it's federal law. So the way he nuanced it wasn't exactly truthful, but he did stay on the talking points.
Well, Joe, though, I think what he said was, I support Connecticut's law, and I would veto a national abortion ban. Let Connecticut decide for itself. Let the other states. What did surprise me, and I know it's unexpected for many people, for the first time in over 20 years, the Republican Party platform did not include a ban on abortion. Donald Trump took that out. So a little surprised Senator Murphy mentioned that 2 or 3 times. Old platforms, yes. Current platform, he was wrong on.
What surprised you? Lightning round questions. Nobody admitted to doing marijuana.
Yeah, no. Look, I could talk about that for hours. But the tipping on the to-go was interesting because I struggle with it all the time. I want to support the folks, but I'm like, I do,
okay,
I do. But
nobody's answered no to that question. You know that, and I know that.
What surprised you, Joe? What surprised you, Johnny?
You know, nothing really surprised me. Again, I think Matt Corey is not a politician. Chris Murphy is one of the more skilled politicians. I serve with him as state senator. He's an extraordinarily skilled politician. Matt Corey, as a local small businessman, I think did a really good job. He aligned himself with Donald Trump. I don't think that's a winner in Connecticut, but he made his points for what he believes, and I think he deserves credit for that.
Yeah, I think Chris Murphy just stands on his record. He's probably one of the greatest senators we've had in Connecticut history. The bipartisan legislation in 2 areas just speaks for itself. He's there to solve problems. And Matt Corey is fair. He has some criticisms. He has it from his viewpoint.
That'll do it for us, Joe. For Joe and John, I'll send it back to the studio with Catherine and Dennis, guys.
All right, thank you very much. You have been watching a News 8 special, Connecticut's United States Senate debate. We appreciate you joining us tonight.
And we invite you to join us for the 8 o'clock news on our sister station, WTNH. And of course, we'll be back here, right here on News 8 for News 8 at 11. Catherine and I will see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock. Nice working with you tonight.
Nice working with you, too.
Have a great night, everybody.